He was never supposed to hear it like that. Not through a half-closed door. Not while standing in his own house with a black velvet box in his hand. Not while holding a diamond bracelet he had spent 3 months designing for the woman he thought he was lucky enough to marry. Andrew Kaine had spent most of his life building things that lasted. Steel, concrete, neighborhoods, contracts, influence. Entire sections of the city carried his fingerprints in ways most people would never understand. At 38, he was the kind of man people studied when they wanted to learn how power moved without making noise. He was rich enough to be envied, connected enough to be protected, and disciplined enough to be feared. But none of that mattered now. Because on the other side of that door, Vanessa was laughing. Not nervously, not drunkenly, not the laugh of somebody caught in a lie. It was calm, smooth, precise. The kind of laugh a person gives when they're completely comfortable, completely certain, completely in control. Andrew stood still in the hallway, one hand clenched around the bracelet box so tightly the edges pressed into his palm. Then he heard his own name, and the world inside him went silent. "I'm telling you, it's already set up," Vanessa said, her voice soft and effortless, as if she were talking about dinner reservations instead of a human life. "Once we're married, I'll have access. Not all at once, obviously, but enough." Andrew didn't breathe. There was a pause, then she laughed again. "You think I would go through with a wedding like this without protection?" Another silence. Andrew stepped closer without realizing he had moved at all. Then she said a name. "Remember Daniel? Chicago?" Something cold slid through his chest. Her tone never changed. "Same structure, same approach, just bigger this time." That was the moment Andrew stopped being a fiancé and became something else entirely. Not heartbroken, not confused, not even angry. Clear. Because heartbreak can cloud a man. Anger can expose him. But clarity? Clarity makes him dangerous. Vanessa kept talking while Andrew stood in the hallway, feeling his entire future rearrange itself in real time. "He's not stupid," she said. "He's just predictable. He wants to believe I love him. That makes everything easier." Andrew closed his eyes for 1 second. Just one. He heard her continue in that same calm, chilling tone. She talked about timing, about patience, about how a man like him never saw the knife if it was wrapped in affection first. She mentioned lawyers, asset reviews, post-marriage access, emotional distance, financial pressure. The slow kind of sabotage that makes a victim blame himself while somebody else empties the vault. She had done this before. That was the part that settled deepest. Not because she wanted his money, not because she had lied to his face, but because none of this was spontaneous. None of this was emotional. This wasn't betrayal born from resentment or greed in the heat of the moment. This was a business model. And Andrew Kaine, one of the most powerful construction billionaires in the city, had not been chosen because she loved him. He had been selected because he fit the pattern. If this opening already has you locked in, take a second right now to like the video and subscribe to the channel, because this story only gets darker from here. And trust me, you are going to want to stay all the way to the end. Andrew stepped back from the door with the kind of control most people only pretend to have. Inside the room, Vanessa was still talking, still planning, still smiling for somebody Andrew could not see. Outside in the hallway, the man she thought she understood had already changed. He walked away silently, crossed into his study and closed the door behind him. Only then did he look down at the bracelet in his hand. White diamonds set in platinum. Clean lines. Elegant. Expensive. Meaningful. It had taken him 3 months to choose every detail, because he wanted it to say something money usually could not. Intention. Commitment. Permanence. Now it felt like evidence from a dead life. He sat behind his desk and let the silence settle around him. 3 weeks earlier, everything had looked perfect. From the outside, Andrew's life bordered on myth. His house sat at the edge of the hills in a glass and stone mansion that overlooked half the city he had helped build. Politicians knew him. Developers feared him. Investors wanted access to him. He moved in rooms where neighborhoods were reshaped over lunch, and fortunes shifted with one signature. And then Vanessa Cole had appeared. He met her at a charity event full of people performing wealth for one another. But Vanessa didn't feel like the others. She was elegant without trying, sharp without announcing it. She knew how to hold a room without raising her voice. She asked better questions than most people gave answers. She listened when he spoke. She didn't seem dazzled by what he owned. That, more than her beauty, was what pulled him in. She made him feel seen, not displayed. Within a year they were engaged. The wedding was already being planned. Private island, hand-selected guest list, security layers, floral installations people would talk about for months. Every detail designed to look effortless while costing a fortune. Everything curated, everything polished, everything false. That Wednesday, Andrew had left the office early for a reason that now felt almost humiliating in its innocence. He wanted to surprise her. His assistant noticed because he never did that. His driver noticed because Andrew normally treated emotion like a private country with guarded borders. Even the security detail exchanged glances when he chose to go home in the middle of the day. But Andrew had been smiling. He walked into the house that afternoon actually feeling something unfamiliar. Joy. Now, sitting in the study while Vanessa's voice drifted faintly somewhere down the hall, he understood how dangerous joy could be in the wrong hands. He didn't sleep that night. Not because he was shattered, because he was calculating. Vanessa slept beside him peacefully, breathing slow and even, as if she had not spent the afternoon outlining a strategy to dismantle his life. In the darkness, Andrew stared at the ceiling and replayed every word he had heard. Daniel. Chicago. Same approach. Bigger this time. Lawyers. Patience. Access. Pressure. Timing. By dawn, the truth was no longer a wound. It was a map. At sunrise, he got dressed and left the house without waking her. He didn't go to the office. He drove downtown to a private building with no name on the directory and security that didn't ask questions. Richard Hale was already waiting. Richard was the kind of man powerful people called when problems couldn't be solved in court filings or board meetings. He was in his 60s, sharp-eyed, silver-haired, and built from decades of navigating crises the public never learned existed. He knew where the law ended, where leverage began, and how to move through both without leaving fingerprints. Andrew closed the office door behind him. Richard took one look at his face and knew this wasn't about business. What happened? Andrew didn't sit right away. He walked to the window, looked out over the city, and then told him everything. Not emotionally. That was the part Richard found most disturbing. Andrew repeated Vanessa's words almost exactly. The tone, the lawyer, The prior victim in Chicago. The strategy. The fact that she spoke like someone who had done it enough times to trust the system. When he finished, Richard leaned back in silence. "That's not manipulation," Richard said at last. "That's premeditated financial targeting." Andrew nodded once. "I know." Richard studied him. "What do you want to do?" Andrew's answer came without hesitation. "I want her to think she's winning." Richard's expression tightened. Andrew stepped closer. "I want her to believe I'm collapsing. I want her to move early. I want every hidden hand around her to come out into the open." Richard understood instantly. It was a trap. Not emotional revenge, a strategic exposure. "You're talking about faking a financial downfall. I'm talking about making her believe I've lost everything." Richard walked toward the desk and stood there for a long moment. "You know what this will cost?" "Yes." "No," Richard said quietly. "You don't. If we do this properly, people will treat you differently. Partners will shift. Friends will hesitate. Employees will panic. You're going to learn who respects your power and who only respects your balance sheet." Andrew's face hardened. "That's the point." There was a long silence. Then Richard nodded. "Fine. We do it carefully. Controlled leaks, delayed project rumors, liquidity concerns. Enough pressure to create doubt, not enough to trigger real damage." Andrew gave the smallest nod. "And while that narrative spreads," Richard continued, "I start digging into her. Quietly. Off the record. If there was a Daniel in Chicago, there may be others." "There are others," Andrew said. "I can feel it." By the time he left Richard's office, the day looked unchanged. The city still stood. Cars still moved. Glass towers still reflected sunlight like money itself. But the illusion was gone. His phone rang while he was in the back seat of the car. Vanessa. He let it ring twice before answering. "Hey." Her voice arrived warm, soft, almost worried. "Where did you go this morning?" "I had something to handle." A pause. "Everything okay?" Andrew looked out at the skyline. No. He felt her silence instantly. Small, but real. Not fear, not concern. Adjustment. "What do you mean?" "There are issues with one of the projects." Another silence. "How serious?" Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "What happened?" How serious? Andrew felt something inside him settle with brutal certainty. "I'm not sure yet." Her voice lowered, smoother now. "Do you want me to come home?" For 1 weak second, the old part of him wanted to believe her. Then he remembered the half-closed door. "No," he said. "I'll handle it." "Okay," she replied. "Just keep me updated. We need to stay ahead of things." "We." Andrew almost laughed. Instead, he said, "Of course." When the call ended, he stared at the dark screen and understood something deeper than betrayal. Vanessa was not reacting to a crisis. She was preparing for an opening. The first report surfaced quietly the next day. A small financial blog mentioned delays tied to one of Kaine Infrastructure's major projects. Nothing explosive. Nothing legally dangerous. Just enough to plant doubt in the minds of people trained to smell weakness before it became public. Then came a second report. Then a third. By noon, suppliers were calling. Project managers were asking careful questions. Investment partners used soft language that carried sharp edges. Andrew answered each one calmly. Temporary delay, Review in progress. Nothing material. No need to worry. But he heard it in their voices already. The shift. Respect attached to power is easy. Respect attached to uncertainty is where people reveal themselves. By late afternoon, Vanessa approached him in the living room. She didn't rush, didn't panic, didn't perform any dramatic concern. She closed the door behind her, stood near the couch, and watched him the way a skilled investor watches a chart before entering a position. "We need to talk." Andrew looked up from the laptop on his knees. "About what?" "I've been getting calls." He held her gaze. "From who?" "People asking questions about the company." He said nothing. She stepped closer. "Is it true?" "What part?" "That there are liquidity issues?" There it was again. Not comfort, not support. Verification. Andrew exhaled like it hurt. "There are some issues." "How serious?" Same question. Sharper now. "I'm handling it." Vanessa studied him, then rested a hand lightly on his shoulder. To anybody else, it would have looked intimate, reassuring, loving. But Andrew could feel the emptiness behind it now. The timing was too perfect. The softness too placed. "You don't have to carry everything alone," she said. He looked at her hand. It felt like a prop. That night, Richard called. "It's working," he said. "And we found something." Andrew stood in the darkness of his study, staring through the window at the city lights. "Tell me." "Daniel Ross, Chicago, real estate investor. Married her 3 years ago under a different name. Divorced within a year. Settlement stripped almost 40% of his liquid holdings through joint structures and legal traps." Andrew closed his eyes. "And after?" "She disappeared. Cleanly. New name 18 months later." Andrew's grip tightened around the phone. "So I'm not the first." "No." The silence turned colder. Then Richard added, "There's someone else." Andrew's eyes opened. "Who?" "Marcus Ellery, investment banker, high net worth. Private meetings with her for the last 2 weeks." Andrew turned toward the glass. 2 weeks. That meant she had already started moving before the first rumor about his company ever appeared. Before the fake financial decline. Before any real pressure existed. She had begun laying tracks to the next target while still standing under his roof, wearing his ring. "She didn't wait," Andrew said. "No," Richard replied. "She prepared." That same night, Vanessa drifted into his study and leaned against the doorway. "You've been distant." "I've been thinking." She stepped closer. "Maybe we should start reviewing things together." Andrew looked up slowly. "What things?" "Our future," she said. "Assets, property, structures, just in case this gets worse." He gave her the answer she wanted. "Maybe we should." And the satisfaction that flickered across her face lasted less than a second. But Andrew saw it. Every predator tells on itself eventually. Most people just don't know how to watch. The next morning, the house felt different. Maybe it was because he now saw everyone through a harsher lens. Maybe it was because betrayal changes the temperature of a room. Whatever it was, Andrew noticed the silence in the kitchen before he even sat down. Maria was at the stove. She had worked in the house for nearly 2 years. Quiet, reliable, invisible in the way competent people often are around the rich. She didn't insert herself, didn't ask unnecessary questions, didn't speak unless needed. But that morning, When she placed breakfast in front of him, she paused for a moment and said gently, "You didn't sleep well." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't manipulative. It was simply true. Andrew looked up at her. Maria wasn't staring. She wasn't fishing. She was just present. "I'm fine." She nodded, but didn't pretend to believe it. "If you need anything, let me know." Small words, yet after hours of hearing carefully arranged concern from Vanessa, that simple sentence landed harder than it should have. Because it carried no agenda. Later, Vanessa came downstairs looking perfect. Hair done, makeup flawless, smile calibrated. "How are you feeling today?" she asked, resting a hand on Andrew's shoulder again. "I'm managing." "We'll get through this." Almost convincing. Then she took her coffee and said, "I was thinking maybe we should start organizing things. Accounts, properties, legal structures. If there are risks, we need to protect ourselves." Ourselves. The word slid across the room like a knife wrapped in silk. Andrew kept his face neutral. "That may be a little early." "Is it?" she asked. "We don't know how serious this is. We should be proactive." When she left, Maria wiped down the counter in silence for a moment, then said quietly, "She seems worried." Andrew glanced up. "Does she?" Maria chose her next words carefully. "Yes, but not the same way most people are." That stayed with him all day. Not the same way most people are. Vanessa spent the afternoon on her phone. Short calls, quick messages, deleted threads, careful timing. She was discreet, but not invisible. Andrew no longer needed proof. He needed patterns. That evening, Richard texted him. She met him. A second message followed almost immediately. Private restaurant downtown. Andrew picked up his keys, because suspicion had become confirmation, and confirmation demanded sight. He drove downtown without rushing. The city was alive in that polished way expensive districts always are at night. Glass entrances, black cars, low voices, reservations made under first names that weren't real first names. The restaurant Richard had sent was almost impossible to find unless somebody wanted you there. No public listing, no obvious sign. The kind of place used for affairs, mergers, quiet betrayals, and conversations people would deny later. Andrew parked across the street and waited. Then he saw Vanessa step out of a black car that was definitely not his. She adjusted her coat, checked her reflection in the glass, and walked inside with the ease of someone entering a room she had already prepared for. Inside, Andrew slipped to the bar without being announced. From there, he had a clear view of the dining room. And then he saw him. Marcus Ellery, sharp suit, controlled posture. The face of a man who trusted money more than emotion and thought that made him safe. Vanessa sat across from him, leaning in slightly, smiling with a version of warmth Andrew had never seen directed at him. Not because it was more genuine, because it was more targeted. Marcus listened. Vanessa led. That alone told Andrew everything. She wasn't there to be charmed. She was there to structure the interaction. A little later, she reached into her bag, removed a thin folder, and slid it across the table. Marcus didn't open it immediately. He looked at her first. She said something, calm, certain. Then he opened it. His expression shifted. Interest, approval, engagement. Andrew stared at the untouched drink in front of him and felt something colder than rage move through him. This wasn't romantic betrayal. It was operational transition. She was moving from one target to the next before the current one had even officially fallen. And before this story twists even deeper, if you're enjoying the tension and want more stories like this, like the video and subscribe right now, because what happens next changes everything. Andrew stayed just long enough to make sure there was no room left for doubt. Then he left. Outside, the night air felt colder than it had any right to. He got into his car and sat there in silence, finally allowing himself to feel something beyond strategy. Not heartbreak. Disappointment. In her, yes, but also in himself. Because he had built an empire by seeing what others missed, by reading risk before it spoke, by identifying weakness before it spread. And yet, in the most intimate corner of his own life, he had ignored the pattern because he wanted the illusion. His phone lit up with a message from Richard. "Did you see them?" Andrew typed one word back. "Yes." Then another message came. "Then you know." Andrew looked up and froze. Across the street, reflected in the side glass of a parked car, a figure stood under a streetlight, staring at the same restaurant entrance he had just left. Maria. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't hiding. She was simply there, watching. Andrew stayed in the car as the restaurant door opened again and Vanessa stepped out alone. Maria stiffened almost imperceptibly. Not shock. Recognition. Vanessa never saw her. She walked to the waiting car, got in, and disappeared into traffic. Then Maria turned. Their eyes met across the street. No confusion, no surprise. Just a quiet, unsettling understanding. Andrew stepped out of the car and crossed toward her. "You followed her." Maria shook her head. "No." "Then why are you here?" She looked at the restaurant, then back at him. "Because something didn't make sense." "What?" "You." That answer hit harder than he expected. Maria spoke carefully, respectfully, but without fear. "You said things were falling apart, but nothing about you looked like a man losing everything. You weren't panicking. You were watching." Andrew said nothing. "I wanted to understand what I was seeing." He looked at her for a long moment. "And now?" Maria hesitated, then asked quietly, "Is it real? The crisis?" She nodded. Andrew held her gaze and, for the first time since this all began, didn't know exactly what to say. Not because he lacked the truth, because she deserved better than the version of it he had created. "I can't answer that." Maria absorbed that without flinching. Then she said something that cut with frightening accuracy. "She's not worried about you." Andrew exhaled slowly. "No. She's planning something." "Yes." Maria studied him, and a shadow passed over her expression. Then she asked the question he had not prepared for. "Am I part of this too?" Andrew frowned. "What do you mean?" "Am I just another person you're observing? Another piece of the situation?" He didn't answer quickly enough. That was answer enough. Maria nodded once, pain hidden beneath her composure. "I understand." "It's not like that." But even to him, the words sounded weak. She tightened her grip on her bag. "You should be careful." "Why?" "Because people who plan like that don't stop halfway." Then she turned and walked away, leaving Andrew standing under the streetlight with a new kind of discomfort settling into his chest. Vanessa's betrayal had sharpened him. Maria's disappointment made him examine himself. By the time Richard called again, Andrew was still staring at the street she had disappeared down. This isn't just her, Richard said. Andrew went still. What do you mean? A pause. She's not working alone. The words changed the shape of everything. Andrew drove without direction for nearly an hour after that. He ended up by the river, parked in the dark, phone pressed to his ear while the city glowed behind him like a machine that never cared who it crushed. I want names. I don't have certainty, Richard said, but I have a short list. Start. Your operations director, Mark Delaney, access to project flow, timelines, pressure points. Andrew dismissed it immediately. No. Your financial controller, Elise Warren. She sees the reporting layers. She'd know what signals vulnerability. Andrew thought about it. Possible, but it doesn't feel right. Richard was quiet for a beat too long. There's a third. Andrew's chest tightened before the name even came. Who? Daniel Hayes. Andrew stopped breathing for one violent second. Daniel Hayes was not just a colleague. Daniel was history. He had known Andrew before the towers, before the tailored suits, before the first million. He had stood beside him in cramped offices and ugly deals, and years when they built reputation out of exhaustion and nerve. There were maybe 3 men on earth Andrew had ever trusted without calculation. Daniel had been one of them. What are you saying? I'm saying he had access, Richard replied carefully. To the business, to your routines, to your personal life. That means nothing. No, Richard said. But this might. Then came the real blow. Daniel had contact with Vanessa 2 years ago, before you introduced her publicly. Different name, private investment event. They spoke. Andrew sat frozen in the dark. This was no longer opportunism. This was design. Keep digging, he told Richard. I want proof. The next day, Vanessa called while Andrew was still parked by the river. I spoke to an advisor, she said. Of course she had. What kind of advisor? Financial, asset restructuring, contingency planning. We can't wait until things get worse. We need to act early. That word again. We. Andrew stared across the black water and saw the machine behind her more clearly than ever before. Not just a woman, a system. Timing, legal layers, emotional engineering, quiet exits. You're right, he said at last. She paused. Then came that subtle shift in her voice. Satisfaction. Really? Yes, let's set up a meeting. You, me, your advisor. Another pause. Then Vanessa smiled through the phone. He could hear it. Tomorrow? Tomorrow. When the call ended, Andrew started the engine and drove back toward the city with a decision set hard inside him. Tomorrow would not be a conversation. It would be an unveiling. The next morning he arrived at the office before sunrise. He wanted the room to belong to him before anybody else entered it. His office sat high above the city with floor-to-ceiling glass and the kind of view that reminded visitors why men like Andrew Kaine were rarely challenged directly. Richard was already there with files spread across the desk. We confirmed 3 prior identities, he said without greeting. 3 separate relationships, 3 separate cities. Same pattern, same legal structure. Combined losses from prior victims, just under 10 million. Andrew skimmed the pages. Different names, different addresses, different lives. Same woman. And Daniel? Richard's jaw tightened. We found indirect transfers. Layered, concealed, but consistent. Money moved to accounts linked to Daniel Hayes over the last 18 months. Andrew turned toward the window. Not because he needed the view, because he needed something steady while the oldest betrayal of his life finished revealing itself. How long? Since around the time Vanessa resurfaced under her current identity. Trust, Andrew thought, was never destroyed all at once. It rotted, quietly. A knock came at the door. Vanessa entered first. Professional blazer, perfect posture, calm smile. She looked composed enough to step onto a stage and lie to the world without missing a beat. Then she glanced back toward the hallway. "I brought someone." Marcus Ellery stepped in. Of course he did. Handsome in the sterile way successful men often are. Expensive suit, controlled face, briefcase in hand. The kind of confidence built from thinking other people were numbers you could predict. Vanessa smiled gently. Marcus specializes in asset protection and restructuring. Marcus extended his hand. Andrew shook it. Firm, dry, calculated. They sat. Marcus opened the briefcase and slid documents across the desk. "I've reviewed your situation," he began. "If the reports are accurate, you have exposure across multiple assets. We can protect a portion of what remains accessible if we move quickly. Ownership transfers, liability isolation, structural reassignment." Vanessa sat beside him close enough to communicate alignment, not intimacy. Andrew listened in silence. Marcus continued, now fully in performance mode. "The key is separating what can still be preserved from what must be allowed to collapse. If we act now, you can avoid catastrophic personal loss." Andrew let the words hang. Then he looked at Vanessa. "You've really thought this through." "I'm trying to help." That word again. Help. Andrew reached for the file, closed it, and pushed it back. "We're not doing this." The room shifted instantly. Marcus frowned. Vanessa went still. "I'm not sure you understand the severity," Marcus said. "I understand it perfectly." Andrew stood. Then he walked around the desk slowly and stopped directly in front of them. "For the first time," he said quietly, "we're going to stop pretending." Marcus looked confused. Vanessa did not. She knew. Not because he had spoken loudly, because the game had just changed hands. "You heard me," she said softly. Andrew nodded. Every word. Silence struck the room like a blade. Marcus looked from one face to the other. "What is this?" Andrew never took his eyes off Vanessa. "This," he said, "was never about saving anything. It was about seeing how far she'd go." Vanessa rose slowly to her feet. Her calm remained, but it was thinner now, stretched over something sharper. "How long?" she asked. "Long enough." Marcus pushed back from his chair. "I think I should leave." "No," Andrew said without looking at him. "You should stay. You need to hear this too." Richard stepped forward and placed a heavy folder on the table. 3 prior identities, 3 prior victims, financial trails, recorded contacts, legal preparations, indirect transfers. You're not an advisor, Mr. Ellery. You're the next stage. Marcus's face lost color. He looked at Vanessa. What is he talking about? Vanessa said nothing. That was the answer. Marcus stood so abruptly his chair scraped the floor. He looked at the folder, at Andrew, at Richard, then back at Vanessa, as if trying to understand whether the woman beside him had ever existed at all. Finally, Vanessa turned to him and said, with chilling composure, "You should go." "Vanessa." "Now," Something in her tone made him obey. He grabbed the briefcase and left. The door shut. And suddenly, there was no audience left, no performance, no buffer. Only truth. Vanessa walked to the window and looked out over the city for several long seconds. Then she spoke. "You know, you're not the first man who thought he was in control." Andrew's voice was flat. "But I'm the first one who was?" A faint smile touched her mouth. "Yes." There was no bitterness in her tone, no panic either, which somehow made her more frightening, not less. "Why?" he asked. She turned slowly. "Because I could." "That's it?" She shrugged one shoulder. "Men like you build lives around money and control, and then call it stability. You think power protects you. Most of the time it does. Until someone understands your system better than you do. And you thought that was you." "I know it was." "Past tense," Andrew said. "What changed?" For the first time, Vanessa's expression altered in a way that wasn't fully controlled. "You did," she said. "You stopped wanting to be loved and started paying attention." That answer sat between them. True enough to sting. But Andrew was not done. "No," he said. "That's not all that changed." Richard placed another document on the table. "Daniel Hayes." Vanessa's eyes flicked to the page before returning to Andrew. Small movement, big consequence. "You should have left him out of it," Andrew said quietly. For the first time since she entered the room, Vanessa looked almost disappointed. "I didn't bring him into it," she said. "He brought himself." The office door opened again. Andrew had arranged that part too. Daniel Hayes stepped inside. He looked older than Andrew remembered from just a few months earlier, not in years, but in something harder to hide. Erosion. Greed. The long-term damage done by living beside someone you once respected while slowly deciding to sell them. Daniel stopped when he saw Vanessa standing by the window and Richard beside the desk. Then his eyes found Andrew. No one spoke for a moment. If you've made it this far, go ahead and like the video and subscribe now, because this final stretch is where every mask comes off, and the ending is colder than you think. Daniel tried first. "Andrew, whatever this looks like, don't," Andrew said. Daniel fell silent. The city hummed behind the glass. Inside the office, the air felt motionless. Richard opened the folder and slid a series of statements across the table. Indirect transfer chains, layered shell entities, consultation payments, event introductions, asset intelligence, all connected back to Daniel Hayes. Daniel looked at the documents and did not touch them. "That's not the full story," he said finally. "Then tell it," Andrew replied. Daniel laughed once, dry and humorless. "You really want the truth?" Andrew's stare never moved. Daniel's jaw hardened. "Fine. You want truth?" "I was tired." "Tired of what?" "Tired of helping build your empire while you became the face of all of it," Daniel snapped. "Tired of being the man beside the man. Tired of watching people treat you like you were self-made while they forgot who was there at the beginning." Andrew said nothing, because that part, at least, contained enough truth to be poisonous. Daniel stepped farther into the room, anger finally breaking through the polished surface. "I gave you years, loyalty, access, strategy. And what did I get? Equity scraps compared to what you became. Respect in private. Your shadow in public." So you sold me? Daniel looked straight at him. I corrected the balance. Andrew almost smiled at the absurdity of it. You introduced a predator into my life to correct the balance? Vanessa crossed her arms and leaned lightly against the window, saying nothing. Daniel exhaled sharply. I introduced her at an event. That's all. After that, she made her own choices. Andrew turned to Vanessa. Is that true? She met his eyes. Mostly. Mostly? Her expression remained unreadable. He saw an opportunity. So did I. The difference is, he thought he was using me. Daniel swung toward her. That's not what happened. Vanessa's smile was cold now. Really? You fed me details, his routines, his vulnerabilities, his blind spots. You told me what kind of woman he would trust. You told me what kind of affection he would believe. Don't act shocked because I was better at the game than you were. Daniel's face drained. Andrew watched both of them and felt something strange settle inside him. Not rage. Finality. Because betrayal becomes easier to carry the moment you stop needing it to make sense morally. Some people are not complicated. They are simply hollow in expensive clothing. Andrew walked back behind his desk and pressed a button on the intercom. Send them in. Daniel frowned. Vanessa straightened. The door opened. 2 attorneys entered first. Then 2 investigators. Not uniformed officers. Not yet. Just professionals with the kind of quiet authority that turns lies into paperwork and arrogance into consequence. Richard spoke calmly. We've documented the fraud pattern, the identity shifts, the asset targeting structure, and the internal facilitation. Civil action begins today. Criminal referrals follow, depending on prosecutorial review in 3 jurisdictions. Daniel took a step back. Andrew, don't do this. Andrew looked at him as if he were a stranger. You already did. Vanessa, however, didn't flinch. She only asked one question. Did you ever love me? One of the investigators glanced up at that, surprised by its intimacy amid the wreckage. Andrew answered with brutal honesty. I loved who I thought you were. Vanessa nodded slowly, as if she had expected nothing else. Then, to everyone's surprise, she laughed. Not loudly, not wildly. Just once, like someone acknowledging a move well played. You know what the funniest part is? She said. If I had waited, I probably would have won. Andrew believed her. That was what made her terrifying. She wasn't bluffing. She wasn't dramatic. She was stating a tactical fact. Patience had been her edge. Greed had broken her rhythm. And now the entire structure was collapsing around her. Daniel looked horrified. Vanessa! She cut him off without turning. Save it. You're not a partner. You were bait with an ego. The investigators stepped closer. One attorney began outlining next steps in a tone so calm it made the destruction feel even colder. Asset freeze motions, preservation orders, cross-jurisdiction notice, private security expansion, internal review of financial access, civil conspiracy exposure. Daniel sank into the nearest chair like his bones had suddenly lost the ability to hold him upright. Vanessa remained standing, defiant, elegant, cornered. Andrew should have felt victory. Instead, he felt emptied out. Not because she didn't deserve the fall. Because seeing evil clearly rarely gives the satisfaction people imagine it will.
It just removes illusion. After they were escorted out, the office fell silent in a way Andrew had never experienced before. The city below still moved. Meetings still happened. Concrete still poured somewhere. Men still closed deals thinking they understood risk. But Andrew stood behind his desk feeling as though an entire chapter of his life had just been burned away. Richard gathered the files. "It's done." Andrew looked toward the window. "No," he said quietly. "It's exposed. That's different." Richard understood. Exposure doesn't heal. It only ends denial. By the time Andrew returned home that evening, the mansion felt larger and emptier than ever. He walked into rooms that now seemed designed for strangers. Furniture Vanessa had chosen, art she had praised, guest lists she had curated.
Future plans she had spoken about in a voice Andrew would never be able to hear the same way again. He loosened his tie and stood in the middle of the living room for a long time. Then he heard movement in the kitchen. Maria. She was wiping the counter, finishing up before leaving. When she turned and saw him, she immediately understood from his face that something had happened. Not because he told her, because unlike the others, she had never needed the performance explained. "It's over?" she asked softly. Andrew nodded. Maria set the cloth down. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Andrew took a slow breath. "I should have told you more." Maria looked at him with that same quiet steadiness that had unsettled him from the beginning. "Maybe," she said, "but I think you were still figuring out who you could trust." That landed deeper than comfort would have, because it was true. He stepped closer. "You were right about her." Maria gave a small, sad smile. "No, I just recognized the difference between concern and interest." Andrew let out the first real breath he'd taken in days. "I'm sorry I pulled you into any of this." "You didn't," she said. "She did. And then you were trying to survive it." He looked at her carefully. Really looked. No calculation. No agenda. No movement underneath the movement. Just sincerity. And after everything he had just uncovered, sincerity looked almost shocking. Maria picked up her bag. "You should get some rest." He almost laughed at the simplicity of it. "Maria," she paused. "Why did you come to the restaurant that night?" She held his gaze for a second before answering. "Because I've seen people pretend before," she said quietly. "And when someone truly cares, even their silence sounds different." Then she added, "She never sounded afraid for you, only interested in what would happen next." Andrew nodded slowly. That was it. That was the whole difference. Real care trembles. It worries. It breaks rhythm. It reveals itself in imperfect moments. Vanessa had been too smooth, too timed, too exact. Maria moved toward the door, then stopped again. "One more thing." Andrew waited. "Don't let what she did convince you everyone wants something." The words hung in the room long after she left. That night, Andrew stood alone in the study, where he had first sat holding the bracelet box after overhearing Vanessa's call. He opened the drawer, took the bracelet out, and stared at it beneath the lamplight. For a few seconds, he considered throwing it away. Instead, he closed the box and set it aside. Not every symbol had to be destroyed. Some only needed to be retired. In the days that followed, the fallout spread quietly but thoroughly. Daniel resigned before he was forced out. Marcus denied deeper involvement and hired attorneys expensive enough to sound innocent, but his messages and meetings told a less flattering story. Vanessa's prior identities began surfacing in legal channels across state lines. Old victims who had once chosen silence over humiliation started talking. Records aligned. Timelines tightened. Doors that had stayed closed for years finally opened because one man with the resources to fight back had refused to look away. The press never got the full story. Men like Andrew made sure of that. But inside certain circles, people whispered. About the woman who targeted wealth like a surgeon. About the partner who sold his oldest friend. About the billionaire who faked a collapse to catch them both in motion. The story changed depending on who told it, but the truth stayed the same. Andrew had almost lost everything, not because he lacked intelligence, but because he had confused attention with love and polish with character. That mistake nearly cost him his life's work. Months later, on a cool evening with the city glowing below his terrace, Andrew stood alone with a glass of water and no desire for anything stronger. The worst part was over. The legal pieces were still moving, but the shock had passed. In its place was something quieter. Discernment. He heard the back door slide open. Maria stepped onto the terrace, carrying a tray from the kitchen. She had stayed on after everything, though Andrew had offered to pay her 6 months and let her leave if the house felt too heavy with memory. She had simply said, "It's still just a house." And somehow, that had made him respect her more than anyone in years. She set the tray down and looked out at the skyline. "Beautiful view." He smiled faintly. "I used to think so." "And now?" Andrew considered the question. "Now I think it depends who you're standing beside." Maria glanced at him, surprised by the honesty. Then she looked back at the city. For once, silence between them felt clean, not performative, not dangerous, just real. Andrew rested his hands on the terrace rail and let the night air move around him. He had spent years building towers people could see. But the more difficult work, he realized, was building a life that couldn't be entered by anyone who mistook access for entitlement. That kind of construction took longer. It demanded patience. And above all, it demanded the courage to believe calm isn't always safety. Beauty isn't always truth. And love that arrives perfectly packaged may sometimes be the most expensive lie of all. So if there's one thing this story proves, it's this. The people who destroy you rarely kick the front door in. They smile. They listen. They learn your patterns. They offer comfort in exactly the shape you're most willing to trust. And by the time they move, the real damage isn't the money they take. It's the part of you that can no longer tell the difference between being chosen and being studied. Andrew learned that too late to avoid the trap, but not too late to close it. And somewhere in the city, behind polished windows and expensive lies, there were still people who thought they were smarter than consequence, smoother than truth, more patient than justice. Maybe some of them were, for a while. But every system breaks eventually. Every mask slips. Every practiced voice shakes at least once when the room turns and the game no longer belongs to them. Vanessa had built her life on reading powerful men. Daniel had built his betrayal on resentment fed over years. Marcus had built his confidence on the assumption that greed always stays hidden behind professional language. They all made the same mistake. They thought Andrew Kaine's greatest asset was his money. It wasn't. It was the moment he stopped needing to be comforted and started paying attention. And once a man like that finally sees clearly, he doesn't just survive the lie. He becomes the reason it never works the same way again.